This is City Manager Jim Drumm with the City of Brunswick in Depth. It's springtime in Brunswick and the Golden Isles, and as we begin April, we're going to be celebrating the Easter and the Passover season. However, springtime also means it's time for spring cleanup. And many people are going to be going into their homes and doing spring cleaning, but in the City of Brunswick, we have to do some spring cleaning too. And so we're going to talk today about the City of Brunswick's spring cleanup, community cleanup, which is scheduled for April 28th. In addition, May and April bring the beginning of our seasonal rains. And so we're going to talk about the flooding that the summer and spring rains bring, and how at the City of Brunswick we're looking at how to address stormwater utility problems and issues with drainage, and how we've put in place a utility study that's going to allow us to look at how we may address our long-term drainage issues that we have here in the City of Brunswick. Our first topic today is going to be about the City of Brunswick spring cleanup for our community. And I'm going to introduce our guests. I have Crystal Heck. Crystal is the Executive Assistant to the City Manager with the City of Brunswick. And I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been with the city and where did you come from?
Hi, I'm Crystal Heck. I'm the Executive Assistant to the City Manager. I originally grew up on St. Simon's Island. We moved over to Brunswick when I was in high school. I attended Glen Academy. I also played basketball and ran track for Glen Academy. After that, went to college, moved back home. So I'm traditionally from Glen County area. I've been with the City of Brunswick about 2 years now, assisting Mr. Drumm in the City Manager's office.
All right, great. I'm going to go down and I'm going to ask, we have Leah King-Bedina, and
right.
You are with the Keep Golden Isles Beautiful.
That's right. I've been with Keep Golden Isles Beautiful for 4.5 years now, and we enjoy partnering with both the city and the county on all sorts of clean, green, and beautiful initiatives in our area. And I've been in Glen County since 1992. I'm originally from Brantley County, just across the border. And when you're from Brantley County, you spend most of your time in Glen County, so I feel like a resident.
Oh, you've been here a long time, and you're not far from home. I bet you go back and visit occasionally.
At least weekly.
At least weekly.
At least weekly.
Well, good. All right, today I want to talk a little bit, again, about our cleanup, and it's something that started with the Keep America Beautiful concept and their spring cleanup that they do, which is called the Great American Cleanup.
That's right. The Great American Cleanup is actually our country's largest litter prevention effort, and it spans from sea to shining sea, all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And that's when Keep America Beautiful affiliates, of which Keep Golden Isles Beautiful is one, where the affiliates and just thousands and thousands and thousands of volunteers focus on the months of March, April, and May to really give our country and our communities a good spring deep cleaning. So this effort with the city is just a wonderful partnership of multiple entities, and when volunteers come out and participate in the city spring cleanup, they're joining with volunteers from across the entire nation, which is really exciting.
That is exciting. And now in Brunswick, you've had a lot of different cleanups. Your organization works with cleaning the marsh. Sometimes
right.
You send people out in kayaks and they go out into the outer reaches of the marsh and
right.
the beaches and as well.
And this citywide cleanup is particularly at a good time of year because our organization spends the month of March with our Marsh Madness, where we send volunteers out into our marshes of Glen to pull out trash and remove the litter. So we're going to be moving from the estuarine environment to the land environment with land litter. So this is just a very natural movement into that next project focus.
Oh, wonderful. I know that last year, and we had talked about other different events of cleanups in the community, but one of the questions that came forward was from Commissioner Felicia Harris. She came to myself and to city staff and challenged us and said, what can we do? We need to try to organize our citizens to get back involved in community cleanups. And she really kind of led that effort, but we also kind of put that into Crystal's hands to be the chair to move that forward. So I'd ask a little bit of how we've partnered with Keep Golden Isles Beautiful.
Okay, so Commissioner at the time, Felicia Harris, had a brain idea to have citizens throughout the City of Brunswick from every community call in and talk to us about areas that they were interested in cleaning up or areas that they thought needed a little bit more attention. So we knew that Leah and Keep Golden Isles Beautiful had a very well oiled machine in litter pickup and cleaning, so we reached out to the experts. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel for some assistance. And what happened was we had people from Leah's volunteer
Right.
pool.
Volunteer.
Basically, they contacted the city and said that they wanted to register for our citywide cleanup. And then we also sent out flyers. We contacted people through media, to call us and say that they wanted to participate. And what we did was form teams. We had a team captain, and then each team captain would let us know how many volunteers that they would have on their team. And we also had different departments within the city identify areas that volunteers, there was volunteer interest, and then there were city identified interests of the citywide cleanup. So we had our director of public work, assistant director of public work, Rick Charnart. He identified some areas, and we also had our director of planning, code, and development, Bryn Dice, identify some areas, and that's how it started.
That's how it started. And it was great. I know that we communicated with churches because we figured that might be a way that churches are spread throughout the community rather evenly. Actually, if you look around the map of the city, there seems to be one on almost every other block.
Right.
And so we figured if we could somehow activate the pastors and the churches and whatever youth groups they might have and try to challenge some of them, and I think that kind of brought some extra folks in as well.
Yes, it did. What was interesting about our initiative was that we had churches from inside the city and in the county contribute to this volunteer effort.
And that's what's so beautiful, if I might add, about the effort, is that anybody in Glenn County can come and form a team and participate. And what's extra wonderful for the volunteers is that our organizations provide all the supplies. So we provide the trash bags and the gloves and pick up the collected litter. So volunteers, we really just need them to come out, provide the muscle,
Right.
and do the cleaning, so they don't have to bring anything but themselves.
And I know last year, at the end of it all, it was rather fun. I participated on one of the teams, and we got a lot of trash. But we all came together in a city park, and we had a really nice celebration, and we had lunch as well. It was like a barbecue, and I think that was a great way to finish and that celebration of that day.
And that's planned for this year as well.
Yes.
We're
Now,
going to cook out
and it's on April 28th.
April 28th.
And the location of if someone's interested, how would they?
Okay, if you're interested in volunteering for the citywide cleanup this year, you would contact the City of Brunswick at 267-5500. You will get probably in contact with me or someone else in the city manager's office. And you would leave us your contact number, your team captain's contact number, and the number of volunteers that you have on your team. And then what we will do is later, once we have our citywide cleanup committee meeting again, we'll have designated areas, and myself will contact the team captains and let them know the assigned area. And we will also let you know about the team captain meeting, correct?
That's right. That's right. So the event itself will be the 28th of April from 9 until 11, but we'll have the team captains come and pick up the supplies. So everything will be staged at Howard Coffin Park in the Recreation Center, and the team captains will arrive 30 minutes early, pick up the supplies, and go straight to their designated areas that Crystal's notified them of, where their volunteers will be waiting, and they'll distribute the supplies and start cleaning. And what is so wonderful about this type of effort is that every person's energy and effort makes a difference. And so sometimes it can be overwhelming, and if we're thinking, oh, I'm just picking up trash, what good is that doing? But my effort, coupled with Mr. Drumm's effort, coupled with Crystal's effort, coupled with hundreds of other people's efforts, is a cumulative, huge and great and wonderful thing, and is really benefiting our entire community.
Correct. And just to bounce off Leah, I'm going to give you some statistics about what we did last year. So last year we had 24 groups that participated. And within those groups, we had 166 volunteers. With the hours that the volunteers put in, we had a total of 312 hours of cleaning of the city from the north to the south. And they were able, their efforts, their sweat equity really paid off. And it helped collect 5,400 pounds of litter, 2.7 tons of litter was collected. We collected 30 tires. We had 720 pounds of recycling collected, and then we also had 2,265 cigarette butts collected. So just from the amount of 166 volunteers, we collected a lot of litter that day.
And one thing, if I might add, when Crystal was talking about the teams, individuals are also welcome to come and participate. And don't worry, folks will not be by themselves out there cleaning, because Crystal has several what we call individual teams where if you sign up by yourself, you'll be placed on a team. So you will not be by yourself, you'll be part of a team.
Right.
But if you're a group, you're welcome also.
Definitely, we want groups too.
We want
and
groups.
Whether it's a church or the Scouts or something like that, we would definitely welcome all groups to come in and participate. So hopefully we'll have a larger number this year.
Right.
It was a fantastic first year effort last year. It was phenomenal. It was wonderful. So
Well, we did have good numbers. I was just hoping that we could increase it, because I know we actually have more streets and neighborhoods than perhaps we have volunteers, but we did make a really great difference last year. I mean, we really did impact the cleanliness and the beauty of the city. And a lot of communities, they saw the volunteers come out, they actually came out and did a little cleaning in their areas as well, or they participated, or they gained a new respect of seeing the volunteers out there, and they decided they would help keep their neighborhood clean since then. And some neighborhoods have not seen that accumulation of trash again.
Right.
So we're really happy to have this partnership.
Right. And we also, what was interesting, we had teams that were competing against each other to say we were going to get the most amount of trash collection. So there you can have your own little,
friendly competition.
Right, friendly competition within this great community event.
And maybe this year we should have an award for the most collected from a team. I don't know. We could.
Hey, we can come up with some kind of awards, and I think folks will realize that it can be fun to pick up trash.
Right.
Again, it's a good team effort out there.
Right. And then we also have a lot of the groups or the volunteers that volunteered last year. They are coming back. They are excited. They are passing along the word. So we would love to have as new volunteers and as many people that would like to participate.
All are welcome, no matter what your age is.
Right, correct.
Very good. So hopefully we'll have people come out on April 28th, and hopefully they'll call us at the City Hall and get in touch with Crystal. In fact, I guess a lot of people, they call the City Hall on a lot of different issues. Sometimes it's Crystal you talk to. So Crystal seems to have information on a lot of things. But if you need that information, please contact City Hall. We'd gladly have you join us on April 28th. Well, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Well, it is spring, and with spring and summer, we see the summer rains start again. And with summer rains brings flooding. And so we want to talk today about our stormwater utility project. And I have our city engineer, Gary Alberson, here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
And would you tell us a little bit about, I do this with every new guest I have on the show. So if you've never been on before, and I don't think you have.
Okay. No,
And
it's
tell
first
us,
time.
yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, and how long you've been with the city.
Okay. I'm Garo Alberson. I'm originally from Alabama. I moved over here in 1996 to work on the Lanier Bridge. I was working with a consulting firm there. After that ended, I liked it here, so stayed here. Have worked locally as an engineer here in town since then, and I have been with the city now for going on 5 years now. Working on various stormwater roadway projects with the city.
Well, and I know in the last few years, we've had a tropical storm, we've had 2 hurricanes, we've had an ice storm. So we've got another number of events, weather events, that have caused some challenges for us regarding our infrastructure. And probably the greatest effects or impacts we've had has been flooding.
Right.
And I know that downtown has been an issue. I know that our infrastructure downtown is probably the oldest part of the city. I mean, some of those old utility lines are
50, 75 years old at least. They've well exceeded their lifespan. So you couple those storm events, like you mentioned, the tropical storms, the hurricanes, with the very old infrastructure, it definitely leads to significant flooding problems in several areas of town, for sure.
Well, and I know if you look even out to some of our subdivisions that were developed in later years, we've got College Park, Magnolia Park. We have some areas where either the lines have collapsed or have really filled in with soil or sediments to clog them, that they're really, at this point, they need to be replaced.
There's ongoing maintenance, of course, required with storm drainage systems, but some of our some of our system has exceeded the point where maintenance does any good. There's no other alternative but to go in there and replace it at this point.
So I know with all those issues, a few years back, the city commission and your department, engineering, actually looked at some grant funding to study the issue. Can you tell us a little bit about how that went? I think the state stepped in actually and provided some funding.
We got a coastal incentive grant through the Georgia Department of Natural Resources to do a stormwater utility feasibility study. And that is a study which would try to determine if a stormwater utility would be feasible for the city, just like it sounds. A stormwater utility is basically works like a water utility. Your property owners are assessed a fee based on the size of their property and the associated amount of stormwater runoff that comes from that property. So then that money is collected and goes towards capital improvements, maintenance tasks, regulatory compliance, that kind of thing, to try to maintain our stormwater drainage system. So this grant, it was a 2-year grant that we went through and studied that area. We did financial analysis, inventory of our existing stormwater system, and a master plan of capital improvement projects that we knew were going to be needed in the near future. From that, after bringing in a citizens advisory panel to help us along with that and provide some additional recommendations, it was determined that we felt that a stormwater utility would be beneficial for the City of Brunswick, and have agreed to go forward and move forward in establishing that utility. And that's kind of where we are right now, is starting the finer points of establishing that utility.
Now, you mentioned the financial analysis, but there was also a lot of engineering analysis being done. And I know you're an engineer, but I think you brought in an engineering firm to assist you on this from just different engineering aspects.
Right. Stantec Engineering came in and worked with us on the setup of this. They helped with the financial analysis. They helped with the mapping and the inventory of our system, and sort of the preliminary setup and the administration of this grant, to help us try to determine if a stormwater utility would be in fact feasible for the city.
And it was very detailed. You analyzed different parcels and the amount of coverage that's, I should say, it's still impervious surface, is correct?
Right. We delineated every single parcel in town, residential and commercial and industrial parcels, to determine the size. We went in from those statistics and determined the average size of a residential parcel, which is typically how the stormwater utility bases the rate fees on, is the average residential size. And then commercial properties are determined based on their size relative to that average size.
And I know in Brunswick and actually Glenn County, there's a lot of older infrastructure. We hear a lot from Joint Water Sewer about their water, sewer, and sewer system, and the old pipes that are in the ground that need to be restructured, replaced, or enlarged in some cases. That is a big issue that we have for infrastructure, but it's really very similar to the stormwater issue. And I guess one difference is, if you think about it, is water and sewer through all those years, whether it was through Joint Water Sewer or the county or the city, those systems actually collected fees that allowed them to operate the system, obviously, because there was a lot of staff involved, but it also allowed them to go back and save funds, put funds aside for infrastructure upgrades or improvements as time went on, replacement. And if you think about the structure, I guess, of stormwater pipes, we don't really have that. Whether it was the city or a developer that built a subdivision in 1950, they put the system in, but there wasn't a mechanism put in place to allow the city, who's going to eventually own the pipes, to come back later on and repair them or replace them as they age.
That's right. There's no mechanism, like you say, for collecting costs to cover those expenses. Right now we have maintenance expenses. Those pipes have to be cleaned and maintained. We have regulatory expenses. That's the environmental regulations are growing. We have a lot of monitoring and testing of our outfalls to maintain our compliance with EPD permits and the environmental permits that we work under. So that's a big portion of it too. But so both of those, the maintenance and environmental, have have large costs associated with them, not to mention the capital improvement costs, but there's no mechanism to bring in fees to cover those costs.
And I think you made a good point when you said that there's regulation. If you go back 50, 60, 70 years, the goal was just to get the water off the property wherever it might go, and sometimes the design was to put it on the next property.
Right.
Hate to say that, it was very basic engineering at the time, or to get it to the river as fast as you could.
Mm-hmm.
But in urban areas like Brunswick, or industrial areas, you've got water quality issues.
Right.
There are people that potentially are companies that perhaps developed chemicals or things that potentially should have been treated or should have not made it into the waterways.
Mm-hmm.
And so the federal government came up with what they call the NPDES, which
That's right.
I believe is the
National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System.
yes.
And basically, that's a permit that we work under. Obviously, we're surrounded by water here. That water is used for recreation, fishing, food. We don't want those waters contaminated. So our permits regulate what goes into the waters. So we have to do a lot of testing and maintain our compliance to ensure that no pollutants are being discharged into those waters, which would damage the recreation or the fishing or the livelihood of those waters.
So maybe what was once more simplistic, just get the water off of my lot or to the next lot or down the street, really now has a whole new component to it, an environmental component.
It sure is. You have to be sure where that water's going, what's happening to it along the way, what it's collecting, what's being collected in that water, what's being discharged at the end point of the water. So it's certainly more than just get it off of my property now.
Right.
So.
And if you think that, you look at that component and the fact that we are really near to sea level, I mean, we really don't have very high elevations in Brunswick. What's our highest elevation that you know of?
About 14 or 15 feet.
Yeah.
Which is not very high above.
That's true.
above sea level,
If you
above high
have,
tide.
if you have a hurricane, then you may be 5 feet underwater, and
Mm-hmm.
if a bad enough hurricane, unfortunately. But we do know we have flooding issues. Sometimes it's not the hurricane. Sometimes it's just a bad summer storm.
Mm-hmm.
And I can recall downtown a couple years ago, before some of the improvements were made on Mansfield Street in Newcastle, that if there was a bad summer rain, or it was the fall and we had the impact of the moon that we have, the water would come up the drains and flood the streets on a beautiful sunny day.
Mm-hmm. And it does. The king tides, the spring and fall tides can, extraordinarily high tides can wash the river water back into the inlets, and it boils back out through the inlets, causing flooding problems from that way. We've since installed, you mentioned Mansfield Street, in that project we installed some tide valves in there to try to keep that water from coming backwards through the system. We've got those valves in a couple of other different areas of town, and they seem to be working pretty well. But that is definitely a problem. So, and then if you get a high tide like that and you get a rainfall event at the same time, it just expands that problem.
Well, and we were able to make some improvements there. We had some SPLOST funds from SPLOST 5 that was done a number of years ago, and we've made a lot of improvements to that area as far as that's concerned. But in the study, I think you determined there was a greater need. But if you consider we've taken care of maybe a couple blocks of the downtown area, there's much larger stormwater utility needs throughout the city of
We
Brunswick.
certainly were. Just from the capital improvement standpoint, we came up with approximately $12 million worth of capital improvements that are needed immediately.
And they're not budgeted.
Right, they're not budgeted, and that exceeds our SPLOST allotment. So that's money that's out there, that projects that we need to do as soon as we can. But
So those are really what you almost would call the emergency projects. There's probably a long list of regular maintenance projects, or I should say replacement projects down the road after that.
certainly, each year as the infrastructure gets older and older, more projects are going to be added to that list of needs, certainly.
Well, last year, I think it was last year, the voters put in SPLOST, and that really helped us. We put the majority of our funds were put towards drainage, and we thought of that in mind of some of our worst flooding areas, such as College Park. And we, at that point, did not really have a clue of how much that project might be to complete. There was needed additional engineering studies, but we thought maybe the $3.5 million that we budgeted might make a pretty good impact, and it might. If we focus it all on College Park, but there are other neighborhoods, other streets that have issues. What did that came back recently, and what's some of the costs on College Park's
It did.
proposed development?
We partnered with Glenn County to do a study of the overall College Park drainage basin. Part of that basin's in the city, part is in the county. Hired an engineer who went out and studied the basin, studied the problem, determined what the flooding issues were, exactly where the flooding was occurring and why the flooding was occurring, and recommended some improvements to that basin. Like you said, those improvements, the estimated cost of those improvements came back around $12 million, which is much more than the $3.5 million that you mentioned that we had allocated
Right.
for SPLOST projects.
Now, some of those improvements would be funded by the county.
Right, right.
So that would not be that the total amount would be 12 million for the city, but our portion of what that might be is greater than what we have budgeted in SPLOST. And I know that we recently actually undertook an additional project trying to make some improvements with flooding along and paving along L Street.
Right.
So it's not like there's a shortage on the list. We got plenty of things, and if we focus on one for 5 to 10 years, we're actually neglecting some other areas. So additional funds would really allow us to address that emergency list.
Exactly. Like I said, there's a long list. We came up with about 6 or 8 projects totaling about $12 million that we feel like could be addressed immediately if we had the funds.
Now, briefly, where are some of the other areas that could use those projects?
There's some drainage issues on Albany Street, a little bit north of downtown. Parkwood on the west end past the hospital near Altama. Parkwood has some problems. Downtown, in the Old Town section of downtown, there's some flooding issues down there on the south end of town. So those are probably 3 of the bigger areas that need addressing. And then you mentioned L Street. We're currently working on design of L Street to provide some drainage improvements through there to try to get that water off of that road also.
Right.
So those are probably the top priorities.
And some are
that we're
very
identifying.
heavily traveled roads.
Certainly are. So, it's just a matter of funding. We just need funding to try to start addressing these projects. And like you say, the longer we go, the more projects, the more areas are going to be aging and be added to that list.
I know that when I came on as city manager almost 3 years ago, we had a discussion about the project. I know that one issue is that for this area or for Georgia, the idea of a stormwater utility was a new concept. And primarily, coming from Florida, Florida has a very large coastline. It was very common down there that cities and counties actually, were putting in place a stormwater utility funding mechanism. Otherwise, there was a lot of investment put in initially to build the infrastructure, but if there's no continued funding, there's no way to replace it or at least keep up with the amount of replacement that's needed to be done and repairs. And so in Georgia, it is starting to take off. It's just that maybe they're 10 or 15 years behind Florida because and they don't have as large a coastline in Georgia, obviously. Right. But there are flooding in other parts of the state due to rivers and other impacts. And there are aging infrastructures due to rain even, if you consider parts of the Atlanta area that may not be on a river, but they may have impacts low areas of the rain. Mm-hmm. In our part of the state, there are cities that have gone ahead and put this in place. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little about those cities?
Like you say, they did start in Georgia, started up around the Atlanta area probably about 20 years ago. The first one was implemented. Okay. And they've sort of kind of slowly worked southward. They're starting to show up more and more here in southeast Georgia. Richmond Hill just implemented one. Garden City has one in place. Hinesville has one. Valdosta has a stormwater utility. Statesboro has one in place. I understand that St. Mary's will be implementing one in the near future. So becoming more and more commonplace here in the southeast. And it's, like we said, it's just a good way it's a fair assessment based on the size of the property and the impervious surface of the property, and a good way to assess a fee to that and bring in money to apply to these maintenance and regulatory and capital improvement projects.
Now, I know that in the case of Brunswick and some of the communities you mentioned, there's a fair amount of properties, especially in Brunswick, that are government owned. Whether it's owned by the federal government, we have our federal courts, we have the University of Georgia has property in the city, we have the college that's within the city. The county has numerous facilities within the city as well. The city has its own facilities. I mean, there are a lot of government properties that are off the tax rolls.
Right.
And in addition to that, we have a fair number of our housing stock. We have a lot of lower valued homes, with a lot of lower income folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so even those those few homes that might pay taxes, I should say the smaller, older homes that are paying very low, they may not be paying enough into the system that would allow us to make some of these repairs. But especially the government properties, being a county seat, this would be an assessment potentially that could allow these governments to contribute to some of the infrastructure that we're providing them to be in Brunswick.
All properties would be assessed this fee based on the amount of impervious surface on the property. So that's what kind of makes the stormwater utility a little more fair system than the tax system. It's not, all these expenses are not put on the back of the homeowner or the small business owner.
Right.
Whereas these larger governmental properties get through without paying. The cost of these improvements is spread equally among all property owners.
Right.
So,
And I know that some people come out and they'll say, well, this is a rain tax, but I think what you just said is a good point. It's really a fee, it's not a tax. It's no different than the water fee or the sewer fee that you're paying to joint water sewer to operate infrastructure of underground piping to provide a service.
right, that piping is there, the pipe system or inlet system or the ditch system is there to convey water away from your property. After water runs off of a property, it enters that drainage system, and that drainage system conveys it away. So this is a fee or a user fee for that conveyance system to get water off of your property, same exact way that you pay a user fee to joint water and sewer to bring water to your property. The stormwater fee is just a fee to bring the stormwater off
Right.
of your property.
And if the city commission moves forward to enact this, they would do it by an ordinance.
Right.
And what they've done in the other communities is they set like a fee, and it's probably a set fee for a home. There's no way to meter the water that comes and goes like you do with your water meter. But there is usually an average fee that would be set in place, and each home would pay a particular amount. The businesses would vary though, because there are some larger businesses that have maybe a couple of acres, and then there's much smaller businesses that have a much smaller footprint.
Right. The way these are set up in a lot of places is there's a flat residential rate. So all residential properties pay the same rate, but then the commercial properties, industrial properties are assessed the fee based on their size relative to that rate. So exactly, the larger, the more impervious surface you have on a property, the larger fee you pay. And there's also areas or a mechanism to provide credits so that a homeowner or a business owner could possibly reduce the fee that they pay if they provide some kind of stormwater management system on their property, say some kind of retention pond, or they're able to somehow reduce the runoff that runs off of their property. There's ways, will be ways built in for them to possibly reduce that fee that they pay.
Okay.
So, and those are the type things that details that we'll be working out in the next several weeks as we sort out this the ordinances of it, and the commission nails down those details of this.
Right. And I guess the concept, some citizens will say, well, how much are we talking? And it could vary, we're not sure. It could start off at a rate, it could be amended over time, probably would be if adopted. So what kind of rates are they charging?
Right, like you say, they vary, but a study that was recently done, I think the average rate was $4 a month around the state. So you're looking at $48 a year. So it's not to your residential tax or your residential homeowner.
Okay.
So you're not looking at anything that's not an exorbitant fee towards any homeowner. Now, obviously, your larger properties that you mentioned, the hospital, the college, who have larger parking lots or more impervious surface, that fee is going to increase for them because obviously there's more stormwater to manage running off of those properties. But just for the typical residential property owner, you're probably looking at somewhere in the range of $4 to $6 a month. So, on the high end of that, $6 a month, you're looking at $72 a year.
Right.
Which is
And I guess the mechanism in Glenn County, if we were able to do that, it would be placed on the tax bill, very similar to our solid waste assessment that we have.
Right.
So it would be like a one-time payment that's done. And in fact, if you have a mortgage on your house, it would just probably be put into your escrow and be part of the overall
Right, in
payment.
escrow, and
Right.
several property owners may not even see much of a bump in their payment.
Well, they would see it. I assure you, people see an increase. But in some cases, again, it's a fair tax. I think people they worry that maybe they have a higher end home with a higher taxes, but they're actually are paying the same as someone with probably with the lowest assessed house in the community. So it's actually fairly treating the issue across the board. It rains just as much on a waterfront home on Riverside Drive as it does maybe in a house in central Brunswick downtown.
It is, and I think that's important to remember with this is, unlike the tax structure where you have a large property, maybe say the Ports Authority over here, for instance, who has
Okay.
a lot of paved area, a lot of impervious surface, yet they would not be paying additional taxes to manage that. They will be paying through that, they will be assessed this fee, so that burden of this assessment is shared through them. It's not just placed on the
property
owner.
owners.
So it spreads it equally among the property owners.
Right, and that's an important point. I think we've kind of covered it a couple times here, but yeah, some of those next steps I think is, but the ordinances, I know they're being reviewed by the city attorney, but I think also we're going to have community meetings. We're going to come out and educational community meetings to let people understand what it's about, understand the importance of the projects that we have, meet with our local businesses, and definitely meet with those governmental stakeholders, again, the port, the hospital, the county.
Then our next step probably is to start talking to these larger users who will be assessed the largest fee based on their property, and start talking to them and kind of give them an idea of what that assessment may be and kind of what's coming to them, so they can start to budget for these things and work that into their annual budgets. But,
True.
and then talking to other property owners, and then we will have, like you say, some public meetings, some town hall type meetings where people can come in and ask questions. We want to get this out to the civic groups and schools and get this out as much as we can, so it's people understand it as well as possible. And people are able to ask questions, and so they know what this fee is going for. If you're assessed a fee, you want to know why you're paying that fee and where that fee is going. So we want to be as clear as we can on that, get as much information as we can out there.
True. I had a business owner tell me, well, what if I'm able to hold all the stormwater that's created on my property on my land, then I shouldn't have to pay? And I said, well, that would be interesting. I mean, you might have a large enough lot to do that, but the reality is, how do you come and go from your property? You drive through the city streets as well, and so the streets potentially still are impacted by stormwater, so everyone's paying into the system as well. So perhaps they would get the discounts that you talked about, but it might mean that it doesn't eliminate them completely from a fee usually under one of these systems.
Right. The credit mechanism will allow for, like you say, a discount, but there's probably no scenario where a property owner would be completely exempt from the fee.
Right.
But certainly will be ways that fee can be reduced by, like you say, managing the stormwater that runs off from your property. So.
All right, very well. Is there any other topic or a part of the topic we didn't cover that we should? What do you think residents need to know? That there might be some changes coming, but maybe the good changes as we're able to address some of these concerns, assuming we see the policy passed.
I think they will. We'll be on the lookout for information sessions coming out. Like I say, we want to have town hall meetings where people are able to ask questions about this. Certainly talk to your commissioners about that, and we just want to get the information out there as much as we can, and then probably see the fee show up on your tax bill. But then we also want people to understand what this fee is going for, and then as the fee starts to be collected, then look for improvements to be made, like some of those areas that we mentioned.
Right.
Start to see work being done. People, if the fee is being assessed and people are paying that fee, they want to see results. And so that's what we want to get out there, is improvements to the system, and people see what they're paying for.
I guess another point, as an assessment too, I mean, someone could say, why don't we just raise our city taxes and then just allocate more city tax funds? I'm not sure that many people would say that, raise your city taxes, but those who might have serious concerns about flooding might. And if we were to do that, there's no guarantee that that money, certainly the first year, that might be allocated, but year to year, your city commissioners could change, and potentially that money could be moved elsewhere with that increased tax rate. These funds are dedicated. Once it's set up as an assessment, it goes into a special fund not to be used at the fire department or police department or any other department of the city. It has to still be used for that function.
These funds are strictly for stormwater use only. In the ordinance, it will be allocated how the funds are broken down towards regulatory compliance or maintenance issues or capital improvement, which percentage of the funds goes to which of those. But either way, it will all be allocated towards stormwater improvements. But you mentioned the tax fee. It's important to keep in mind that if taxes were to be raised, that's still typically the residential homeowners and the small business owners paying that increased fee.
That's a good point.
Your larger governmental entities and those tax exempt properties are still not being assessed that additional fee. So they're still getting by, whereas they would be assessed under the stormwater fee. The tax increase will not affect them,
Right.
whereas it will under the stormwater fee.
So even though you might be able to bring the same amount of money in, theoretically, it's going to be spread out evenly, is what you were trying to get across.
Exactly.
That's fair. The people who are actually getting the service will actually be paying for it, everyone.
Exactly. It puts more of the burden on those
Okay.
larger users.
All right, well, this is still a project in progress, so I guess
It is.
we'll see where it goes.
It is. It's going to be a few more months kind of working out the details of it. Like you said, the attorney is working on the ordinance, and then there's some questions. There will be questions and details of it that we have to sit down with the commission and things to nail down, like the actual cost of it,
Right.
and the monthly fee, the credit manual, what credit mechanisms we nail down, and just how the thing is structured, and the percentages that once the fees come in, the percent that each regulatory or maintenance or capital improvements, how those percentages are broken down. So those are a lot of the details that we'll be working out over the next few months before it's actually enacted. But during that time, we want to have these public information sessions and start getting the information out to the people so that they can better understand and ask questions and know what's going on with this.
Well, very good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for
Okay.
coming today, and I think we got some good information out there
Okay.
for our citizens.
Great.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we had a very informational show today, and I think we learned a lot about the City of Brunswick community cleanup this April. But we also learned about flooding that we've had and some of how we're going to be addressing it in the future. So looking forward to having you next month. It's been a great program. Thanks.
Hi, this is Mathew Hill with the Brunswick Downtown Development Authority. According to our most recent Facebook poll, the top 5 annual events in Brunswick are the old-fashioned 4th of July celebration on July 4th at Mary Ross Park, the Brunswick Christmas Parade the first Saturday in December, the Georgia Elvis Festival second week in March, First Fridays, the first Friday of every month in downtown Brunswick, and the Brunswick Blessing of the Fleet Festival. This year, the 80th festival will be at Mary Ross Park. April events include First Friday on April 6th from 5 to 8 p.m. in downtown Brunswick. Check out the stores, the restaurants, our new winery, and our distillery. Golden Isles Live on April 28th featuring the 3 Redneck Tenors, 7:30 p.m. at Glen Academy Auditorium. Brunswick Actors Theater, this month's play is Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike. Starts April 21st. This 2013 Tony Award-winning play is about family. April 21st from 9 to 11 at Glen Place Mall. Drop off your electronics for recycling. There will also be free document shredding, and there is a fee for TVs.